All right, welcome into part 2 of the training camp preview. With me, of course, Robert Schmitz from the Bears blog, editor-in-chief. Robert, before we dive into the defense, anything you want to promote that you got coming up on the Bears blog? Anything different this season? Schedules a podcast? What do you got going on?
Good question. Keep checking in. Chances are I'll do some film breakdowns on everybody's favorite Bears here coming up soon. Right now, it's been a lot of job transition for me, not like writer stuff. That's great, but I'm talking the bill payer, right? And so the last couple weeks have definitely been taking it fairly easy as far as what we're doing on the site. But I want to get some hardcore Caleb Williams stuff, hardcore Roma Dunze stuff, hardcore, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It dawned on me that right after the draft, there's an audience, but most people like me went, "Oh my God, we're done." And we'll come back to it as we get closer. So come back when we're done.
Yeah, it's the off season. This one especially felt a lot more exhaustive with everything that was going on and the Caleb Williams, Justin Fields, everything. So yeah, I think a lot of people when they got to basically May 1st were like, okay, let me take some time off until July. But we don't get time off. We're diving in here. We're diving in. We're talking defense.
We're grinding.
So, before we get into the defense itself, I think Matt Eberflus is worthy of having a conversation. And I think it's pretty remarkable, Robert, that a haircut can make as much of a positive impact on a person in any walk of life than it did for Matt Eberflus this year. And look, and there's positivity about a new offensive coordinator and Keenan Allen, Caleb Williams. This all plays into everything that's got everyone lifted up. But right now, nobody is talking about the fact that Matt Eberflus was a coach that I would say 90% of the fan base wanted fired after they lost to the Packers game. And I was one of them. Not so much because I thought Matt Eberflus was incompetent, but because I was ready to move on from Justin Fields to Caleb Williams. I felt the Bears were as well. I felt the best stability around a quarterback was an offensive-minded head coach, so that offensive system stays in place throughout their tenure. Now, Ryan Poles disagreed, kept Matt Eberflus around. Matt Eberflus shows up at, the combine with a new look, and everyone's like, hey, look at the new look on Eberflus. Everyone loves him. He seems looser at the podium. So everything that went into Matt Eberflus wanting to be fired, but we're going to get into here, kind of went away this entire off season, but it's going to start being talked about again in the regular season. And that I'm talking about is in-game decisions that I think Matt Eberflus did a lot. Again, he's a young head coach in terms of experience that should improve. But Robert, there were a lot of questionable decisions. A lot of people wanted Matt Eberflus fired for a multitude of reasons.
Oh yeah.
He is still here and he is probably more popular than ever.
I mean, it's wild, right? Because I feel like we've seen a lot of defensive coaches. I know I'm harping on the defensive guys. Sorry, boys. But the defensive coaches that get put in this position a lot, Bill, they show up the next year at camp looking exactly the same, saying exactly the same thing, and nothing changes, right? Which is what everybody was decrying. There's an element of Matt Eberflus right now, the way he talks, the way he looks, the way he's speaking. Honestly, his smile looks brighter. He looks like a man emboldened. And if you feel like I do, it feels like they fired dork Matt Eberflus and hired cool Matt Eberflus.
Right.
And it's just a matter of what that means on the football field. I mean, in terms of what he has said, I know a lot of people don't remember a lot of what Matt Eberflus said in light of Caleb Williams because we were thinking about it in terms of Justin Fields, but he has talked much more openly about wanting an offensive quarterback and an offense in general that leads the team more so than most defensive minds that I have seen. Most defensive minds talk about the quarterback like an interception waiting to happen. And Matt Eberflus talks about how he wants a quarterback that makes 1+1 = 3, that he wants to put that, or he wants to be aggressive and put the ball in the hands of trustworthy players that are able to make big plays, because he knows, I think, how easy it is for those really good players to undo his own defense, and the logic sticks. To me, this is exciting. It's just a matter of, okay, are we going to be true to our word? Right? Like, when the rubber meets the road, is it going to look like the Browns game again? And what a funny game to be talking about, right, Bill? Because on one hand, the only reason that game was close is because of Matt Eberflus and his defense. On the other hand, yeah, I mean, Justin Jones dropping into coverage gets talked about again and again and again. It's a blitz. That's what happens. I actually don't mind the call, truly. But why on earth is Terrell Smith in on the last drive of the game? Like, why are we doing this rotating quarters thing? Why do we do this rotation thing in general when it comes to a lot of his decisions? There's a couple of Eberflusisms that maybe they're the things that drive us crazy, the same way that some Bills fans can't stand Sean McDermott, but we enjoy a really successful era of Bears football. I don't know, Bill, but right now the team feels so good that as long as the coach doesn't absolutely botch it, he should end up looking like he turned over a new leaf just because he managed the ship. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of managing the ship, here's where you give Matt Eberflus plenty of credit. And not just because Ryan Poles says he's good from Monday to Saturday, but because the players say he's good from Monday to Saturday. and that's a big part of being a coach. Again, we can't, say it doesn't matter the decisions you make on Sunday. Those decisions matter more than anything you do Monday to Saturday. But Eberflus runs a good ship. Everyone says it. The other thing Matt Eberflus has to get a ton of credit for, and everyone talked about it last year, that team was in a death spiral in September. Now, again, they were unprepared for the season, which is 100% on Matt Eberflus. I mean, I remember talking to Aaron Lemming in August, and, Aaron does like the big season preview with me right before week 1 every year. And we were both talking about it like, something seems wrong here. Something's off with the team. I don't get what's going on here. I don't know what's going on. This doesn't feel like a team that's ready. And it sucked that we had that nailed because they were flat coming out. They were not prepared for the season. That's on Matt Eberflus. So I'm not giving him a break for the fact that they started off 0-4, because they started off 0-4 in part because they were not ready to go.
Right.
But at that point of the season, I mean, I had Nick Costos on my podcast saying, this is literally the worst team in the NFL. And they felt like it. They had been slaughtered by the Chiefs. They were blowing leads. They didn't look competitive. And he rallied the ship. Remember, if Matt Eberflus loses to Washington, he should be fired. That was the basic media stance. Rallied, had a great game against Washington, and obviously finished 7-10. But the fact is, that he was able to rally this team, that the players didn't quit at 0-4, does say something to what kind of rapport he has with these players. The fact that he holds them accountable, that they, usually when a coach holds players accountable, he's not a player's coach, he's a hard ass. Matt Eberflus seems to hold players accountable and be a player's coach. It's a tightrope that he seems to manage to walk well. So before we get into in-game decisions and some of the concerns there, I do think he should receive a lot of credit for what he was able to do in October moving forward, and the fact that he does seem to have a good establishment as to how a team should be run on a day-to-day basis.
And another thing, just to buoy everything you're saying, Bill, look at Nathaniel Hackett. Look at a lot of these coaches like Adam Gase that have flat out failed. You can be good on the whiteboard and not a good head coach. It's very easy. We don't like to talk about a lot of these examples because they're boring, right? And they don't look like they were good on the whiteboard by the time they became head coaches. But rallying the guys, getting Jalen Johnson to play the way he did, getting Andrew Billings to play the way he did, getting TJ Edwards looking like he's running around like a bat out of hell, getting the offensive line to gear in the way that I think they did for a lot of the middle point of the game, and not losing DJ Moore amidst all of this is, I do think it's kind of an accomplishment. You're going to have bumps in the road. Look at the biggest I think, Bill, when we look at head coaches, the biggest thing that we probably should say about the way the Bills season worked last year is that it got so bad they had to fire somebody, and it didn't really feel like it got a lot better after that. And the Bears, despite having to come back from the absolute brink, that 0-4 September was horrible. They weren't just bad, they looked bad. They felt bad. The shot that was it, I can't remember which network had the game, but the shot of the Bears sidelines in the middle of the third quarter of that Packers game in week 1 was ice cold to most Bears fans, where it was like, how are they shocked too? I'm shocked. They can't be this shocked. But from that point, I mean, the Bears picked up a pretty good edge rusher, and you would think, based on the way the fan base feels about him, that they picked up one of the best edge rushers in the league in Montez Sweat. I mean, they have played up the Tez effect to the point where they are massively outsizing who Montez Sweat is, and that's okay. I mean, you want the players to feel larger than life because that's the stuff that makes people buy in. I would have thought that Matt Eberflus, according to the standard rap we give defensive coaches, would have hated Caleb Williams. He seems to really like Caleb Williams.
Right.
And if Matt Eberflus can be a defensive mind that gets a lot out of his players, like for instance, the more I watch Jaquan Brisker, the more I personally don't really like him. We'll get there later, but that's just my style of a safety. Matt Eberflus pivots to cover 3 and gets a ton out of Eddie Jackson, Jaquan Brisker, and the linebacking core as a unit. And there's a lot of cap tipping that needs to be done. We tend to hate defensive coaches. I'm not about to tell you, Bill, that I think Matt Eberflus is turning into a top 5 head coach in the league, but I'm willing to sit back and let him surprise me, as opposed to just hammering my fist into my desk, shouting about how the Bears need to pick up an offensive play caller, because there's only 3 Matt LaFleurs. And even they don't seem to necessarily win every single game that they play. So there's a couple ways to do this. The Bears choosing stability actually does make some sense. After all, Bill, what if the Bears brought in Ben Johnson and he's awful?
Right.
Then what? Is it over? Was it a misfire before it ever started? There are worse things than sticking with somebody who, Bill, you and I made fun of this. The moment they won against Washington, you and I DM'd back and forth. We said, this is what's going to happen. The Bears are going to trot out a couple wins from now to the end of the season. They're going to say the Bears went 7-6 since September, and they're going to use it as a reason to keep Matt Eberflus. But maybe there is some merit to the argument. I mean, they beat some teams they had no business beating. The way those Lions games felt. I know we talk about it all the time, Bill, but it took 3 near historic collapses for this team to not be a 10-7 team last year. The head coach does get some modest credit to that, right?
He has to. Yeah, absolutely. He has to get credit for it. And that's the thing. And you talk about the stability, which they did choose. And I do think Matt Eberflus is very safe this season. He's not 100% safe. If for some reason the wheels fall off and this team goes 4-13, there's going to be problems. Don't get me wrong. But now, if Brad Biggs is accurate in what he reported back in December, that Eberflus only has a 4-year deal, that's where things get a little complicated. Before we get into the in-game stuff, Matt Eberflus, in terms of stability moving forward, if he is truly on a 4-year contract, he's up for an extension after this season. This would also be then this season that if you want to move off of Matt Eberflus and hire a new head coach, would be after this season. That's the last thing Caleb Williams needs. And you and I have talked about it. I am now the biggest Matt Eberflus fan, not because I think he's great, but because I want him to succeed. Because if Matt Eberflus is fired, that means there's problems with Caleb Williams. Maybe not specifically with Caleb, but things aren't going on the trajectory that we all expected them to go on. So I'm a big Matt Eberflus fan. I want him to be the head coach of this team for the next 8 to 10 years, because that means there's stability. The team is winning and Caleb Williams is the guy. So when I look at this and go, and I talked to Courtney Cronin about this, I said, I would really love, if that 4-year contract is accurate, I would really love that. I hope that Matt Eberflus got pulled into Kevin Warren's office with Ryan Poles sitting there and saying, we're giving you a 1-year extension right now. We're not announcing it. We are giving you a 5-year deal so that we can assess you after 2 years of Caleb Williams and decide if we're going to fully extend your contract. And I hope that happened, and I hope Matt Eberflus accepted it. I have no idea if that's true. But what I don't want the Bears to do after this season is have to give Matt Eberflus a 4-year contract extension. But I also certainly don't want them in a position where they need to make a decision if Matt Eberflus is the right guy for this team. Making that decision after 2025 makes a lot more sense to me than after 2024.
I agree. And I think what I keep coming back to, Bill, among everything that you're saying, is all of us agree that we're worried that the Bears are going to get outcoached when you get to the top of some of these games. We're worried
because we've seen it.
we've seen it, and because if Matt Eberflus is the first defensive coach to really rise and make noise at a Super Bowl level, he will be the first to have done it in about 15 years. I mean, outside of Belichick. But Bill Belichick, I think he has earned exception status, don't you?
Bill Belichick does not count as a defensive-minded head coach.
Right, exactly.
He's just a GOAT head coach.
He's just Bill Belichick.
Right.
And that's fine. But what I think does, I don't know, Bill, it's funny because when you look at Ryan Poles, I would argue that keeping Matt Eberflus was the hard decision. It would have been very easy to go publicly justify firing Matt Eberflus and backing somebody else. He didn't do that. It probably took a lot of arguing on Ryan Poles' behalf, or on Matt Eberflus's behalf from Ryan Poles to keep Matt Eberflus. So he obviously believes in the guy. And to your point of what we were saying about Nate Davis just on the last show, it is so easy to express doubt. It is so easy to be unsure. It is so easy to think you don't have the right guy. You could argue it's a lot stranger to think you have the right guy and defend him this hard. So hopefully Poles is on to something. Hopefully Poles sees something in Eberflus that the rest of us don't, because I've not seen most GMs that are this committed to their head coach.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, Poles is.
They're very committed. He's this is the guy that's going to do it, which I didn't expect, because I was one of the people that thought that Eberflus and Poles were sort of an arranged marriage. So
I think they were.
And if they were, you would have thought that the GM would have just let him go and said, hey, dude, you had a 14-game losing streak. I can hire Ben Johnson. I can hire, I don't know, any other offensive name that I want to. We will see you later. Thank you so much for building the defense. Would have made sense, but that's not what they did. And when we take a look, because do you want to get into some of the X's and O's stuff? I do think there's an interesting story here that's more encouraging than meets the eye, even if there's definitely a season worth of questions still left to ask.
Yeah, no, we can get into some X's and O's, and why don't we do that while we get into kind of the in-game decisions and some of the questions we had. So I'll kind of give out my concerns that, and I'll just kind of speak in general terms, that Matt LaFleur ran circles around Matt Eberflus in week 18.
Yep.
Not just week 1, week 18, the last opportunity Matt Eberflus had. You talked about the getting caught in the blitz in the Cleveland Browns games with Justin Jones dropping into coverage. And of course, Joe Flacco throwing for 260 yards, whatever it was in the fourth quarter of that game. That's a problem. So the questionable decisions in the Detroit Lions game. I hated that he went for it, and I hate the play call in the Denver Broncos game at the end of that game. There are multiple things. The time management he had at before the half of the Saints game, the Browns game. I don't remember which ones it was, but there are, between time management, between play calling, offensive play calling, defensive play calling, the conservative nature, which again, we talked about in the previous episode, may have been Justin Fields related. There are enough things for me that we can ride the wave right now, the Caleb Williams wave. Everyone's feeling good, but week 3, when there are decisions to be made in the fourth quarter that are going to impact a win or a loss, at this point, I do not trust Matt Eberflus in that situation. And I am going to have to see him grow and develop and change for me to ever get there, because what I have seen, not just last season, but in the previous seasons, it's not there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the thing, right? Especially when you're talking about a bad team. Bad teams are going to need near perfect coaching decisions in many cases to give yourself a chance to win. It is funny to me, Bill, that we talk about kind of having our cake and eating it too sometimes. I'm going to call you on this just a little.
That's
That
fine.
we don't want Matt Eberflus to be a conservative doofus that allows other teams to win games. And then we're also mad at Matt Eberflus for going for fourth downs and not getting it, where, like you're saying, if he doesn't trust his quarterback, and I know the game you're talking about, Khalil Herbert just dragged you down the field, play by play for what, 9 almost consecutive handoffs. Why would you not feed him the ball in the 10th and let him try to prove something to you? But it didn't work. And when it doesn't work, sorry, dude, we're going to put you on the grill. And it's funny when we talk about the Bears defense because I hate the way they started. It's not dissimilar from the Getsy thing. I like Luke Getsy's plan, but Justin couldn't do it, which makes it a bad plan. I should have said that clearer in the last episode. The Eberflus defense started with a plan that I think was garbage. They wanted to play cover 2, like half field zones, knowing that they didn't have any pass rush. Or
Yeah,
maybe
can we also say how bad Alan Williams? Forget what Alan Williams did off the field. Alan
my
Williams
gosh.
was bad.
And that's the thing. What we'll never know, Bill, is how much Matt Eberflus had delegated to Williams.
Right.
So if that wasn't Eberflus's decision, but was instead Williams telling him, yeah, no, this is going to work. This is going to work. And Eberflus said, yeah, okay, Alan. Yeah, all right then. Okay. Then I would believe it, but I can't say that. I can't say that boldly, right? What I do know is Tyreek Stevenson really struggled to get depth in his cover 2 zones, which is why I know you did, Bill, consistently saw the Bears get popped over the top on any third down, where as soon as somebody leaked into the honey hole in cover 2, they got the ball, they picked up the first down. It was free money. They were one of the worst defenses in history up to that point because they gave up any third and long ever. What went quiet was that the Bears defensive line was doing a great job against the run game, which is why I'm a monster fan of Andrew Billings. We will get there. But within that, their pass defense was so bad that I kind of like that they then pivoted to cover 1, cover 3 man. They basically said, Tyreek's not good at zone right now, so we're just not going to play it. And their guys delivered. There's an element of that, Bill, where they scrapped the whole defense and said, we're a man blitz defense until we figure this out. And it worked. They bodied the Raiders. They bodied the Lions twice for most of the game. They smoked a couple teams on their schedule, and then they started mixing in more zones. They started getting I don't want to say fancier. They started disguising better because TJ Edwards showed that he's a savant from that like depth blitz where he lines up like he's just going to drop into any normal coverage snap and then just comes straight down the pipe and creates problems. And then Jalen Johnson gets hurt and they go back to cover 2 because I think they were worried about Terrell Smith long-term in man. And like you're saying, they get lit up by Matt LaFleur's Packers. I also have this conspiracy theory that the Bears equipment guys let him down and basically didn't give guys the right cleats because there were so many slips on the Bears side of on the Bears offense and defense that it had me thinking the surface might have had something to do with it. But that's a whole separate problem. I don't love that Matt Eberflus went back to zones at the end of the game. I don't love that the Bears entered the season with no real plan at pass rush and then almost acted like because they got Montez Sweat, they were good now. We're not there yet. But the changes did seem, Bill, like they fit what the Bears personnel was and showed awareness of who these guys are and proper evals of what they can do. And that's at least a little encouraging because we've seen a lot of teams where they say, well, this is how I want to play defense. You guys are going to play my defense instead of molding what they are trying to do to the way guys are playing right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the defensive play calling and the improved defense, we'll get into the secondary here, but Matt Eberflus gets a lot of credit for the development of that secondary. That is his specialty. And Kyler Gordon, Jalen Johnson, Tyreek Steve, Brisker, they're all developing. And that, yes, Ryan Poles hit on those picks, but Eberflus gets credit for that as well. And like I said, Matt Eberflus isn't going to be perfect with the decisions. He's going to make some mistakes. That's fine. Bill Belichick makes mistakes. That's fine. But at the same time, there needs to be an overall improvement from Matt Eberflus in the heart of those decisions. And I think we're going to see some of it because I do think there was something to that Justin Fields aspect. I do think we're going to see a little bit there, but I also think we're going to see still some conservative calls and everything. And like you said, I don't like, I want them to be more aggressive, but at the same time, I don't like the aggressiveness on fourth down. Yes and no. I understand exactly where you're coming from, and I'd have to look at exactly how I analyzed everything in the moment. But my knocks on Matt Eberflus, and this comes back to Justin Fields, were not the fourth down decisions as much as they were the third down decisions that led to situations you didn't want to be in fourth down. There was a lot of that in there as well. So there's a lot that goes into this. It's not, and that's the one thing I think when we like to argue football, it's black and white. This guy's awesome or he sucks. When the fact is there is so much gray area in all of this as we kind of wrap up this Matt Eberflus conversation that this team, if it's built properly, Matt Eberflus does not need to be Bill Belichick. But what he can't be, it'd be nice if he can, with great coaching, squeeze an extra win or two out of the Bears on Sundays. Even if he's not that guy and he's in essence squeezing an extra win or two from Monday to Saturday that we're not seeing, that's fine. But we can't see him, like we saw decisions that directly cost Bears football games last year. That needs to go away. If Matt Eberflus is just a neutral person on Sunday that isn't significantly impacting the win or the loss, I will sign up for that right now and probably sign up for that moving forward. But I will definitely sign up for that in 2024. We just need to see Matt Eberflus not being a negative on the sidelines.
This will be a little bit of an abstract way to make this point, Bill, but football favors the offense a lot when you get into the last 4 minutes for a lot of reasons. Number one, people forget how much of a weapon it is to have all 4 downs available to you. Like the moment you hit the point where there's no going back, we have 4 downs. Now you go from needing to average 3.5 yards per play to averaging 2.5 yards per play, which is a major difference. You get that extra completion attempt to try to move the chains. But beyond that, Bill, the defense you're calling is not traditionally the defense you spent all week practicing because you're playing a 3-deep zone. Like a 3-deep prevent. Why does the prevent teams from winning? Most of the time, it's because it's something they ran for 10 minutes at the end of every practice and not the defense they game planned around. So they're much less hesitant when they're playing base defense than they are when they're playing the prevent. I say all of this because I feel like, Bill, the blueprint for Matt Eberflus succeeding in Chicago is making as few of these game-deciding decisions as possible because it's football is not set up for him to succeed in these scenarios, right? Andy Reid, pull the play call out. In Matt Eberflus's case, I can tell you the play call more than likely of what he's going to trot out. It's going to be like 2-deep shell. It's going to be cover 4. It's going to be a 3-deep prevent. You can't throw a 6-man blitz at Joe Flacco on 3rd down with the game on the line. Because if he beats you, the media never lets it go for an entire year. And so my hope would be through player development, through really good defensive adjustments, the Bears just dust some teams before the fourth quarter ever happens. And then you go into the fourth quarter up 10 points and you're just asking your offense to split with the other team. And at that point, you have a formula that the Bears actually followed for the entire back half of the year. They just kept mashing teams. Think about Minnesota, Bill. If the Bears offense scores at all, Monday Night Football is over at half.
Oh, yeah, that could have been a blowout.
The Bears defense was killing Minnesota.
Because remember that Josh Dobbs story was huge going into that game. That was Josh Dobbs was playing at another level. He was playing as like a top 12 quarterback, and he was annihilated.
He got annihilated, and the story was over. They closed the book on Detroit in Detroit, and the offense just didn't deliver. It's fine. It's fine. I'm not trying to start a fight when I say all this. It's more that this Bears team is built to get up early and then cruise to the finish. And they're not the first team that's built that way. It just means that, like you're talking about, Bill, the more moments we see where the camera's fixed on Matt Eberflus in the last 2.5 minutes of a game, the more moments we're going to have that we're going to complain about because he's not set up to make decisions that look good for him. And when he is, it's going to look good for Shane Waldron and Caleb Williams more than it's going to look good for him.
Yeah, Absolutely. So let's start getting onto the
Let's do it.
field here with some players here. We spend a good amount of time there on Eberflus. Let's start with the defensive line because let's not bury the lead. That
Might
is
as well.
what everyone is talking about. I don't want to separate edge and D tackle. We'll talk about both together here because the fact is there are holes here. This defensive line, unless Dexter and Pickens become significantly better players, is technically worse than it was the back half of last year because Justin Jones wasn't replaced. And Justin Jones, especially when Sweat showed up, played pretty darn well. So when we're looking at this defensive line, Robert, we're seeing a defensive line that was the worst in the league last year with pass rush before Montez Sweat showed up, became at least, NFL quality while still in the bottom part of it, at least NFL quality once Montez Sweat goes up because they were high school quality before.
Right.
And the fact is that unless Dexter has a big step forward, they're obviously not going to, Yannick Ngakoue, someone like that may be coming in here, but they're obviously not going to be landing a giant defensive lineman in August. Like you said, maybe the trade deadline, and we can talk about that. But I do think Ryan Poles knows the situation with this defensive line because talking to people, I do believe they were in on Leonard Williams. I do believe they were in on Jonathan Grenard. I do believe they were in on Hunter. I do believe they at least checked in on Wilkins. They wanted to potentially see if they could bring a defensive lineman into this unit that was an impact player, but they were not willing to spend the $21 million that Leonard Williams got, the $25 million that Wilkins got, the 18, I think it was, that Grenard got. That's not what they were willing to spend. Will it be what they're willing to spend next year when they have less holes and still have a good chunk of change? Maybe, but they weren't there yet. So Ryan Poles made an active decision, not this is how it has to be. No, he made an active decision to not spend above his price points and commit to this defensive line, at least until the trade deadline where they may bring someone in or bring in an Ngakoue, a serviceable type of edge here in August. It is a problem, Robert, where good linebackers, potentially great secondary, a good defensive play caller, but if this defensive line cannot get pressure with 4, and I don't know if they can, it is going to expose a really good secondary into looking a lot worse when you can't cover for 6 or 7 seconds.
Absolutely. I mean, it could be the return of the blitz days just because the Bears need to get that pressure. And I don't think that the Bears are badly geared to blitz. I like what Kyler Gordon and TJ Edwards can bring in that department. But actually, the bigger concern I have is that right now the Bears don't have a 3-tech that can stop the run very well. I mean, Justin Jones, for all of the parts where I know I watched on stream just laughing about how Justin Jones was not a very good pass rusher and often got washed out in the run game. Dexter was much worse in that department. Dexter was actually a pretty inspired pass rusher, I thought, Bill, especially as a rookie. Most of these defensive tackles don't do near anything, especially when they're that raw. But his pad level got him into so much trouble that on one-on-one blocks, he rarely defended his run gap well. And in double blocks, it wasn't a question. He got moved. And with a guy like Tremaine Edmonds that we'll talk about later as a near automatic liability, the moment you get 2 hands on him, that's not going to work long term as far as just the cohesiveness of this Bears defense. Because if you're allowing too many 2nd and 4s or 3rd and 2s, this defense is just not built to defend that. You're trying to get them, obviously, into 3rd and 7, 3rd and 6, 3rd and 8. And the more of those short yardage downs you allow, the more your defense is going to get grounded to paste. I mean, one thing I think is interesting, Bill, I'll ask you this. Knowing what we know now, having seen the Keenan Allen trade, do you think that the Bears opted into the Keenan Allen trade because they lost out on the defensive lineman? Or do you think that they lost out on the defensive lineman because they were in the midst of negotiating the Keenan Allen trade and were actively prioritizing the offense over the defense, saying, we're not going to let this defensive lineman get in the way of what we can do as far as supporting a rookie quarterback?
Well, I would say, I don't know if it was Keenan Allen per se, but I do think there was a conversation of, is it worth overpaying a Grenard to come here and not have any ability to bring in another receiver?
Right.
I do think that was a conversation. I think Keenan Allen kind of came together pretty quickly
That
the
makes
way
sense.
that timeline. But
I like the way you're putting that.
were they waiting for potentially any of these other Brandon Ayuk, for example? Were they waiting for potentially any of these guys to potentially become available where they could go out and get them because they had the resources? I do think that was part of the conversation, as we talked about in the last episode. If they didn't have Keenan Allen and were forced to trade up for Roma Dunze, the trickle-down effect that would have had in the draft and everything. So, yes, I think that was part of the conversation, but I don't think it was specifically about Keenan Allen.
I ask because it wouldn't surprise me if, like you're saying, the Bears considered offense priority number 1 and defensive line priority number 1B, where it's still important. Everybody knows it's important. But if it costs us our shot at supporting Caleb Williams, we can't do that. That it was just non-negotiable.
Right.
If that's the case, proper priorities, like small little round of applause for, hey, thank you for taking the L there on defensive line as opposed to surrounding your quarterback with talent. We just still got to figure this out. And it's part of why, at least to me, Bill, you mentioned Yannick Ngakoue. That just does nothing for me. I mean, the Montez Sweat plus DeMarcus Walker.
It does something for me because that means that Dominique Robinson isn't on the field.
Sure, but like, how much better is Yannick Ngakoue, who, take PFF for what it's worth, they had him graded past 100, Bill. There's not that many edges that touch a football field. And they had Yannick Ngakoue as one of the 10 worst in football. And I unfortunately think the tape matched. And so, to me, I just can't help looking at this defensive line right now and saying, of course, we hope Gavon Dexter steps forward. Generally speaking, hyper athletic defensive linemen like him don't stay bad against the run forever. I don't want to make it sound like I think he's a designated pass rush tackle. I think he'll figure it out. But how much is he going to figure out? Then beyond that, Bill, defensive line is like a 7-man position. You need at least 3 edges and probably 4 defensive tackles. The Bears have 2 defensive tackles that we like, if you're counting Dexter, and then 1 defensive tackle with some pretty major question marks. And then they don't really have a backup behind Andrew Billings. It feels to me like this is ripe for a move. And I'm going to keep saying that because there's a disgruntled defensive tackle whose team just drafted his replacement. And he already requested a trade last year, and it would just be a matter of what does it cost to go get Jonathan Allen and kind of complete the picture, not only in Chicago, but also in Washington. But I'm not trying to get too crazy, right? It just feels to me like this defensive line is almost obviously not done. Don't you get that feeling?
Oh, yeah. The defensive line isn't done. The question is it done for 2024? Which it may be. Now, again, if someone becomes available, like you said, Jonathan Allen, and obviously, I know that's a new regime that's in there, but that's obviously a team they dealt with when they got Sweat. That's certainly a possibility. And I would not put it past Brian Poles to use one of his second round picks to go out and get a guy like that and keep him around. Because when you talk about it, and let's just talk about 2024 right now before we talk about kind of building things out. When I look at Dexter and when I look at Pickens, we talk about, well, we need them to improve as Bears fans. We need to see them get better. Well, absolutely, we need to see that. But I look at Zach Pickens and go, if the Bears don't change his usage, I don't think he's going to get any better. I didn't see anything on tape that I circled and went, ooh, I didn't think Zach Pickens could do that. Anything pretty much that popped on tape for me was a negative for Zach Pickens last year. I'm not a big fan of where he is right now, but I also wonder if he was being misused because there was a lot of one tech in there and a lot of him being tasked to do things that I didn't see on the South Carolina tape and was curious why they were trying to do that. I look at Dexter and saw a lot of positives where I'm here wondering if Pickens will ever make it. And I'm confident in saying that Dexter at a minimum is a solid rotational player, your third defensive tackle. And that's fine if that's what he ends up being as a second round pick. But in terms of potentially trying to make an elite jump, like a second round defensive tackle, like Chris Jones made, where he was able to become an elite 3 tech, for Dexter to do that, I don't want to get into, I try to avoid too much of the specifics of what's happening on the field. But the one thing that didn't get improved, I thought his get off improved some last year. His pad level did not. He
Right.
was very high on a regular basis, which is able to get the offensive line to get into your pads and control you. And if I don't see that improve this year, you're talking about, the disruptive three tech. You've got to get low to penetrate. He does not get low right now, which means he's not going to be a penetrating three tech. If he's trying to read and react, he may improve against the run and get you on the ground after a 1 or 2 yard gain because he didn't get moved off the line of scrimmage. That's all possibility. But that's, again, the difference between Andrew Billings, and I understand one tech, three tech, but that's the difference between Andrew Billings just being a solid player who you can't run at, who could eat a double team, certain things that he can do. But Andrew Billings isn't going to just disrupt the game because he's constantly in the backfield, because that is not his game. If Dexter is also not in the backfield because it becomes not his game, then they aren't generating interior pressure, and that's going to cause a problem if they can only get pressure coming from the outside. So I think Dexter's pad level is a critical thing for him this season. We'll see if Washington, the new defensive coordinator, who's a defensive line expert, can help him, because if the idea is that Zach Pickens becomes a solid rotational player and Javon Dexter becomes a disruptive defensive tackle this year, I don't think it's going to happen.
I think it's just asking a lot. And I think it's okay to say that it's asking a lot. Maybe in 100 multiversal runs of this scenario, it happens 8 times. That's not horrible odds, but betting on it is the problem. It's the difference between that would be great if it happened and we need it to happen or the team falls apart. Right. And it's funny you talk about his pad level. I thought his pad level got him specifically killed in the run game, because in Florida, he used to basically stand straight up and catch the lineman that came at him. And the difference between a 21-year-old business major at Tennessee and a 28-year-old grown man that knows that if he doesn't blast through this defensive tackle, he's going to get cut, and he has to explain to his wife that they got to pull their 2 kids out of school and move across the country so that maybe he can stick somewhere else. The motivations are a little different when you say.
Yeah, exactly. And like what you're talking about there is, in essence, lock, peek, shed, where you lock the offensive lineman, you peek into the backfield, see where the play is going, shed your blocker, and make the play.
Right.
That worked at college, but Dexter was locking and peeking and not always shedding. And then you're doomed at that point.
Especially, God forbid, that 310-pound offensive lineman gets his hands underneath your pads because you stood straight up and you're like 6'6". Like, he's a huge dude. He can be a real weapon if he figures some of the coordination pieces out, which I have no idea. I'm not a boxing specialist, so I can't tell you based on his little workout videos whether or not that's getting drastically better. But I appreciate the fact that they're focusing on hand placement, because I think Dexter needs it. I think betting on Dexter to become Chris Jones, like you're talking about, is a flawed plan. I'm comfortable I'm comfortable with some plan where maybe they bring in a defensive tackle. It doesn't have to be Jonathan Allen, but you bring in a defensive tackle, you have Dexter play a significant role, but share the load with somebody else, and then potentially take the baton next year with a little more ammunition. But also, part of me just doesn't believe in the Crosby type anymore, right, Bill? Where it's like, I'm not expecting any of these guys to play 100% of the snaps. And if you're telling me that Zach Pickens is going to be 35% of the snaps behind Andrew Billings, I do not like this. I mean, that's just way too many snaps for a guy that does not belong at one technique. So the defensive line needs some work. It's far and away the clearest position that needs improvement. The good news, I think, is that, I mean, if I could be honest with you, Bill, a weak defensive line is not helpful for Caleb Williams, but maybe a training camp where you're not constantly under pass duress is a positive in and of itself, just as he learns to deal with everything. But it's the weakest part of the defense. It's part of why I'm going to keep talking about a potential move. It just makes too much sense, because if Bill, one move, I don't know, maybe the Bengals season goes south and Trey Hendrickson hits the market, or any number of different defensive lineman ads that you could make. If that gets you one more win, and that one more win gives you a 50-50 shot at a playoff win, it's worth a second round pick to a regime in the place that Ryan Poles has it.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree at all that a move makes sense, but obviously a move has to present itself and the other teams have to agree. and that player has to want to be extended, because if you're going to trade capital like a second round pick, you're obviously going to want to keep him around. But before we move off the defensive line, let's talk about the edge spot opposite Montez Sweat.
Let's
we
do it.
know the impact that Sweat had. We talked a little bit about the D tackles. We both like Billings. Questions on Dexter and Pickens. No depth there. Keith Randolph, I don't think is worth time, but if he can pop a little and play one tech, maybe that gives Pickens more versatility to play into roles where he's better. But that opposite defensive edge position where we talked about Ngakoue, where at least he's been there and knows the system, but yes, the tape was bad. He is going to have to be motivated to really want to come back, because this is the type of thing, if the Bears sign him and he has another season like last year, his career is over. He will not get signed by anyone ever again. They'll say, up, Ngakoue's finished, and that's it. So I think Ngakoue will understand how much is on the line for him if the Bears do sign him. But and I think the Bears will sign somebody, but as of right now, without having that guy on the field, I mean, you got Jacob Martin, who can play, 20% of the snaps, I guess, and not embarrass you. Kind of feels like a Rasheem Greeny type guy there that's not going to make an impact, but at least can be part of the rotation. I love Austin Booker. I would have been okay if Austin Booker went with the 75th pick. That's how high I think I had him, 68 or 69 on the big board I put together. Big fan of what he did last year. I understand he's a one-year wonder, but getting one-year wonders in round 5, that's fine with me. If he can be maybe that rotational edge where DeMarcus Walker is eating most of the snaps at edge and bumps inside with Dexter to rush on third down, and Booker can come in and you just say, just get low, grab the quarterback's ankles, and let's see what we can get out of you as a rookie kind of thing. Maybe that works, but I don't want Dominique Robinson on this team, let alone on the field at this point. He literally, and I do mean this, watching him, he literally has not played well since the rain game against the 49ers. That was his last good game. And that was his first game of his career. That's it. Every other game since then has been garbage. So they've got questions here, Robert, and while you don't want Ngakoue, it seems maybe there's a different edge that's available that you'd rather see him target. But how do you approach the second edge position right now? Because I think it is beyond clear. We could have said this on May 1st, and I don't think there's many teams that you can do this. The Chicago Bears first round pick in 2025 will be an edge.
It sure looks that way right now. I mean, maybe I'm being too bold, right? But part of me looks at this defense in particular and thinks that, especially with the skill that a lot of teams have at tackle, that if you've got Montez Sweat on one side of your defense, the other side of your defense could be a combination of DeMarcus Walker and Austin Booker. And part of me thinks you could get away with it because you'd be giving Austin a bunch of developmental snaps to basically be a designated pass rusher. Like, the expectation and the hope of what you're putting together is that you could put Austin Booker on the Bryce Huff path, and then you've got 1 and 2 edges like between the two players. You still need rotational guys at that point because it doesn't help anything that, like you're saying, you're pretty shallow on talent, but edge is expensive. Like, how much do I really need to bang the table for Carl Lawson or Emmanuel Ogba? They would help for sure, but this is a league of needle movers and the other guys, right? And if you aren't, I don't know, Myles Garrett, it's just hard to find guys that are good enough to be available in July, but also not good enough to actually, they're bad enough to be available in July, but they're good enough for me to really demand that the Bears have them.
Right.
So I don't know. Part of me looks at this and says, you kind of just have to lie in the bed you made and hope that you supplement this with blitzing. I'm comfortable with the Bears being a blitz heavy team, not because I don't love zone defense. I actually really do, but because, like we're talking about, Bill, we're going to keep running into the same unavoidable problem of the Bears need to play like a 5-down defensive line just to get 5 out and create enough one-on-ones to create any pressure. And that means you're covering with 6. And so the math works out the other way. We'll see what the Bears do. I personally am right there with you that what I don't want to see more than anything, honestly, Bill, whether it's signing Yannick or whether it's signing Unique, whether it's not trading for somebody, whether it's starting on Dexter, whatever the Bears do, I just don't want to see them drop 7, rush 4, drop 7, rush 4, drop 7, rush 4 behind this specific defensive line with no changes.
Yeah, no, I think if they do that, they are going to get themselves in trouble. Obviously, you're not going to blitz every down, but they're going to have to bring pressure this year. Unless something, Austin Booker gets 11 sacks as a rookie and nobody saw it coming, like, unless that happens, they're just not going to be able to get pressure with 4. And, you're talking about blitzing. So let's move on to the linebackers here, because they do have a couple good blitzers in Jack Sanborn and obviously TJ Edwards. They do know how to get to the quarterback. That helps. That's not in Tremaine Edmonds, wheelhouse, but that's fine. Now, Tremaine Edmonds' wheelhouse, I've got problems with what's in that wheelhouse, and we're going to talk about it here now. Here and here's the thing, and let's start with Edmonds, because obviously that's the big fish here, and the contract is the issue. Obviously, TJ Edwards wildly outperformed his contract. That's what you want out of the linebacker position. I am not one to pay a linebacker. I said all along I think Roquan Smith deserves 5 years, $100 million. I don't want the Bears to give it to him. That was my stance. I certainly didn't want 4 years and $72 million for Tremaine Edmonds. And and I get the people, oh, well, they signed Edmonds and Edwards for the same amount of money as Roquan. Well, not really, because Roquan's not going to see that 5th year, which I think is $24 million a year. That actual money is a little bit lower for Roquan. So the Roquan and the Edmonds deals, assuming Roquan gets extended again in Baltimore when this contract is up, or is let go and it becomes a 4-year deal, the cash isn't that different for Roquan and Tremaine Edmonds. So, I mean, that was definitely Eberflus, I think, saw a better fit with Edmonds than he did with Roquan, and he moved on. If you're going to pay a linebacker $72 million, he better be a big time difference maker. He better be the heart of the defense. He better be Fred Warner is what he better be if you're going to pay him $72 million. Tremaine Edmonds wasn't even the best linebacker on the team last year. That's a problem to me. When they made that move, I thought it was stupid. I wanted them to sign Bobby Okereke to be TJ Edwards in essence, and Bobby Okereke had a great season with the Giants. Now, I didn't think TJ Edwards was going to be part of the mix, but that's fine. Edwards instead of Okereke. And Jack Sanborn, who I understand has some liability in pass coverage, but he makes $1 million a year. That would open up $17 million per season on your salary cap if you just committed to the guy that you found, Ryan Poles, as a UDFA, brought him in, and he splashed as a rookie, and you said, no, I can't go with that as my mic. I can't do it. And you decided to pay money for Tremaine Edmonds. So I need Tremaine Edmonds to be awesome. At least second team All-Pro awesome. That's what I need out of an $18 million linebacker. And to me, he was nothing more than average at best.
What drives me nuts about this, Bill, is that you're not going to get that. You're going to end up disappointed. It is way too much money. But also, I remember a couple of years ago, I think it was during the 2019 offseason, I had this awesome opportunity to sit with Coach Chris Vassar, Coach Vass on Twitter, and break down some Fangio tape. And we started watching and talking about Eddie Jackson. And I'm obviously a big Eddie Jackson fan, but I didn't even have to say it. Chris looked and said, Eddie Jackson, I remember his Alabama tape. He looks like he's the best player on the field right now. And I said, a lot of Bears fans cannot stand him. They think he's not been any good since this, that, or the other. And he said, oh, well, I have no idea about the contract stuff. But as far as who's on the field, he keeps popping out to me. And when I watch Tremaine Edmonds, he really does clog the middle of the field from a passing perspective pretty well. He's huge out there, and he's really fast. There are a lot of throws that a lot of quarterbacks don't attempt because he's out there. Is that worth $18 million, Bill? That's the magic bullet that I can't ever answer well. It's way too much money. That's what a first-round pick costs, though. I mean, we saw the same thing with Roquan Smith, and in this case, you got a second-round pick plus the Roquan Smith deal is kind of what you're looking for. Right. I can't stand the fact that I have yet to find a better way to phrase the football phrase that that I cannot say on this podcast because it just doesn't work anymore with current society. But Tremaine Edmonds is a very big person that plays very small. And he will not take on a blocker. He will not power through. And he had some major tackling issues at the first half of last year that made his speed irrelevant. Because when you get into the flat for what could be a TFL, don't get it and a Packer wiggles out and picks up another 14 yards after the catch, then who cares that you were there in the first place?
Right.
But for as many passes as he's not picking off, because everybody wants, you'll note, Bill, nobody is throwing at Edmonds when he's in place. They're throwing at Edwards because they think they can beat him. There's an element.
Edmonds is the better pass coverage, better in coverage than Edwards. There's no denying that.
The problem with Edmonds is that he'll also get lost from time to time, where he falls back on what he did at Buffalo, which was a little more zone match, as opposed to like stand in a zone and take up space with your eyes on the quarterback. But I think there are things to like about Edmonds. The contract is a huge hate. It's like 3 steps backwards, 1.5 steps forwards kind of thing. Where if you actually ran with just Sanborn and Edmonds and Edwards, I think eventually you would spring a couple leaks in pass coverage that you don't have because Edmonds is back there. But I also
love worth $17 million a year.
No, of course not. But you're talking to a linebacker hater. So I believe there's always another Jack Sanborn out there, even though we've all watched plenty of Josh Woodses in our life. So it's a funny position to talk about for the Bears because I do think this defense is way more geared towards featuring its linebackers than most of the other good defenses I'm accustomed to. A lot of teams, like look at the Packers over the last couple of years, are practically throwing anybody out there at linebacker and also Quay Walker. But so then in the Bears, their linebackers are carrying a ton of defensive weight, and TJ Edwards has been nothing short of awesome. But TJ also needs to play within a very specific range. He doesn't have the reach to get out there and cover the areas that Terrell Smith left open when Jalen Johnson wasn't on that side of the ball. So it's give and take, but I really like where the Bears' room is at, mostly because of Sanborn. Like, doesn't it feel deep to you? With Sanborn in there, it really feels like they have 3 starters.
And Noah Sewell didn't get a lot of snaps, but I think Noah Sewell's capable, right? From what I can tell. He may not be, but I think he's capable. But now I know a lot of this is in relation to the run game, but I'm going to throw some numbers out on this podcast just because I love piling on Tremaine Edmonds, so I'm going to do it.
Do it.
All right. So now, like I said, a lot of this ties to the run game, but I always do a series every year, the 10 Bears with the most to prove this season. So you can go to Windy City Gridiron and check it out. I believe that all 10 names have been released. Tremaine Edmonds was number 6. And here's some of the things I cited in on terms of stats, because I am a giant guy that tackles are overrated, just in terms of, hey, this guy had 114 tackles. I want to know, and I've talked to you about this. It's like a bad NBA team. That bad NBA team that's only winning 15 games is still scoring 100 points a game. So someone there is scoring 20 to 25 points a game. Kyrie Irving's scoring 24 points a game, and he's a hell of a lot better than the schlub that's scoring 24 points a game for the Detroit Pistons, who won 13, 14 games last year. Right. So when I look at tackles, I look at it the same way. Team's going to run 65 plays. A bad defense is going to have 59 non-scoring plays, and a great defense is going to have 62 non-scoring plays, and someone's got to get the tackles. So the tackles are more splitting up the pie in terms of who's making those tackles. It's more about, were those tackles impactful? So here's some of the stuff on Tremaine Edmonds. Tremaine Edmonds was 6th on the Bears in tackles for loss with 5. 6th on the Bears as their middle linebacker. Montez Sweat had 4 and played half the season. Jack Sanborn had 7 and played half the snaps, if not less than Tremaine Edmonds, and had more TFLs. Tremaine Edmonds, 5 TFLs. He finished 176th in the NFL in TFLs as a middle linebacker. That's not going to cut it for me. But if you're like, oh, well, he doesn't penetrate, let's look at stops. All right, let's look at stops.
No.
Stops are tackles that, of course, end up in essence in a non-successful play. Robert was talking about it in the last episode about success rate on offense. Who made the tackle that made that a non-successful play? So Tremaine Edmonds on stops. TJ Edwards finished 12th in the NFL on stops. Excellent. Tremaine Edmonds finished 97th in sacks. In like, I am not making these numbers up.
No, of course not.
If you want to
Is the
go
moment
by,
you started bracketing out the categories, I was like, oh, he's gonna be awful.
and if you want to go by stop percentage in terms
It's
of
worse.
opportunities, Edmonds actually improves. He gets up to 81st at that point. But like he is not making an impact. And I'll even go as far. He had 4 interceptions, including a pick 6. And you sit there and say, well, 4 interceptions out of a linebacker is great. And it is. And he is better in pass coverage. But on those 4 picks, one of them was a hit arm that the ball fluttered and landed in Edmonds' hands. And the other 3 were all tipped. And just the ball went to Edmonds. Now, one of them he caught and brought it to the house. Thank you, Tremaine. You may almost let us beat the Browns. But almost. At the same time, they were not playmaking interceptions. He did not read the quarterback, step in front of the tight end, and pick the ball off. They were lucky interceptions. So when I look at Tremaine Edmonds, I look at a guy who just lets the game come to him. This is we talked about with Justin Fields last episode. Lets the game come to him and tries to react. My middle linebacker, especially when I'm paying $18 million, and Jack Sanborn tries to do this, attack. You need to attack from that position, Robert, and he does not do it.
Well, it kind of goes back to the center thing we've talked about, though, where when you look at most linebackers across the NFL, you either have the athleticism to let the game come to you, which is what you learned to do, because when you were 16 years old playing high school ball, absolutely nobody could keep up with you. And so you never learned to be instinctive. Or you're Jack Sanborn, you have a below 1 RAS, I think, and you have to be instinctive or you're simply never going to get there. And that doesn't change the fact that Jack Sanborn has made some tackles that guys like Tremaine Edmonds flat don't. That it's valuable when Jack comes off or when Jack scrapes himself off a defensive end or he scrapes himself off an offensive lineman, finds a way to grab Jalen Hurts with one hand and still pulls down one of the thickest quarterback runners in football. Like there's a want to that kind of thing that's not only endearing, but it's valuable. The problem is that when you combine both, you get like 4 dudes, maybe. Roquan Smith didn't want to scrape himself off blockers and kept trying to backdoor everything in 2022, the year before he got traded. You mentioned Fred Warner. There's one of him. And there's like 7 guys that get paid like they're Fred Warner. And the only other one that's good is Roquan Smith, in my opinion. And so it's just a funny conversation because you talk about how the ball keeps getting tipped. Tremaine Edmonds' job, in as many words, is to stand in the coverage net and take up a lot of space. The ball bouncing to Tremaine Edmonds is like saying it bounced to the middle of the field because he's all over it. Is it worth $17 million? No. I'm going to keep coming back to that so that it's clear you and I agree. It's more this idea of they are valuing something that you are saying is very niche as if it is hard to find, which makes it rare, which makes it expensive, which makes it a pain to pay for. Because if your run defense isn't good enough to force them into passing downs that then get you more tipped Tremaine Edmonds interceptions, first of all, the tipped interceptions don't look like they're because of Tremaine. And second of all, you're wasting the money. And so it's this matter of, was it a good player to add? Yes. Was it a good player to add at that price? I don't really know if it ever was. It's exciting, but it wasn't good. And that's just where we stand.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move to the secondary here as we, and we'll do a little special teams here to wrap up. Because I don't think we can ignore it with Torrey Taylor and the new kickoff rules. But in terms of the secondary, and again, secondary is going to tie to defensive line. We just talked about how we're not sure how well the pass rush is going to go. If they can generate enough pass rush, just enough, where the quarterback has, even if they're not getting sacks, they're just getting pressures. They can get enough there, especially if they can get a little bit in the interior of that defensive line and get quarterbacks to get flushed out of the pocket a little bit, get uncomfortable. The secondary is just set up to have a monstrous season. Awesome. The only way this secondary injuries and the defensive line is the only thing that is standing in front of this secondary. I think, without looking at the specifics of all the other teams, they at least can make the argument that they have the best trio of corners in the entire league. Their safeties are good. They're not amazing. Kevin Byard's obviously a little older, coming off a bumpy year with Philadelphia, which I don't think was his fault. But at the same time, I look at Brisker, who, I'll sit there and say has issues in coverage, but is a very useful player in this defense in terms of coming up, blitzing even, coming up in the run game, being a sure tackler. There's plenty that Brisker does. But what I think is interesting with Brisker, Robert, is, they've already paid Jalen Johnson. They're going to want to pay Tyreek Stevenson, I would think. That now nickel isn't as expensive. I think Kyler Gordon's going to get extended after this year, 15, 16 million a year.
Oh my gosh, that would be so much. You
What's
think
that?
so?
You think it'd be less? You think it'd be 12, 13?
I think you could look at like 7 mil a year. Like
Oh,
maybe
I don't know. I think Gordon's going to have a big year. So
he has to have a huge year to get CB1 money. Like he's playing nickel. It's not me trying to hate. It's like
no. That's CB1 15. Well, again, I think things are changing. Sauce's contract is going to change some things. So
maybe it will.
I mean, what
That's
top nickel?
top
nickels get what, about 13 million, 14 million right now?
Do they? Okay, who's a top nickel that's gotten paid?
What did DJ Reed get paid? Was he like 11?
Get paid?
Kenny
Moore is going to be our big one. A Moore contract. You can hear my mechanical keyboard. 3 years, 10 million AAV.
So again, and I think Gordon is going to have enough of a year where he at least is in elite nickel money. So 11, 12 million a year.
Okay.
I think that may get
up
to 13, 14. But either way, I think Kyler Gordon is going to stick around.
Look at us find the middle of both of our starting points.
I think Kyler Gordon's going to stick around. Jalen Johnson's already sticking around. And Tyreek Stevenson, now mind you, Tyreek Stevenson, you can kind of pay when Jalen's money's coming off the books, depending on how you play with that if Jalen isn't sticking around. But regardless, they have 3 corners that they want to pay. Paying Jaquan Brisker at that point is going to be a challenge. You can't pay everyone. I'll cite Adrian Amos as the perfect example. Adrian Amos in 2018 absolutely deserved a contract extension with the Bears. He was very good in the role he was. I know we gave him grief, again, because of pass coverage and that he was more coming up in the run game and all. But Adrian Amos could not get extended because the Bears simply did not have the money for it. Same with Bryce Callahan. They couldn't keep everyone, Leonard Floyd, etc. That's eventually going to be a problem with the defense. And I think the first point we're going to see it is the secondary. I think Jaquan Brisker is going to have a hard time sticking around here after 4 years, but if he continues to improve, he might be able to. But Robert, what I'm saying is this is a good problem to have because you literally have 5 players in the secondary and a decent backup in Terrell Smith, who absolutely can play at an NFL level, at least a serviceable NFL level, which is fabulous as your CB4. It's a great problem to have, Robert, that they have this much talent in the secondary. Jonathan Owens, a capable third safety, which they did not have last year.
Amen.
This secondary has the possibility, if it gets enough support up front, to be really special.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, Kyler Gordon, I think, is so funny to talk about because when you look at his splits in straight up man coverage, Bill, he leaves a lot to be desired. But I also think he's such a good blitzer and very spry in zone coverage to the point where he's good enough in man coverage to help you live with it, especially because my favorite part about Jalen Johnson and Tyreek Stevenson is that both of them just seem really obnoxious to play against. And I feel like that's what makes a good corner at the end of the day, right?
Absolutely.
Like Devontae Adams really struggled against Tyreek Stevenson, which is just me picking one matchup. There were plenty that did not work out that way. But this was the classic example, I feel like, last year of Mike Evans taught Tyreek Stevenson a lot of lessons through mossing him that Stevenson then applied later in the season. And if you remember, on key downs, as the Lions tried to get back into the game in the second game that they played, it was Stevenson who went one-on-one with Sam Laporta and just consistently shut him out near the end. Those 2 corners get you a lot. The big question that I have with Brisker, and this is the perfect season for him. Can't believe I'm saying it, Bill. So Brisker's a funny safety because when you give him deep half coverage or deep third coverage, I think he gets lost. I don't think he's very instinctive. I think he's one of the slowest play readers on the field. When you see moments of misdirection or you get it, like a reverse or something like that, play action, Brisker's usually one of the last to react on the field. But he's a nuke in the run game. So it's a very weird evaluation
Right.
because I never really liked Landon Collins when he was playing for Washington back in the day. And the Bears have a safety that reminds me a lot of him. He never falls backwards. He's actually quite hard to block. When they ask Brisker to pass rush, he succeeds. Like
Yeah, he does.
it's a very funny player because he's a tank from a physical perspective. He's just maybe not a safety. And so I don't know what that means. If in terms of cover one or cover three, Brisker might be the secret ingredient, Bill, that keeps the run game on track. And then at that point, if you're dropping 6 and it's Byard, Johnson, Stevenson, Gordon, Edwards and Edmonds, this is a decent coverage net with 6 and Brisker sitting at the line of scrimmage taking the running back or something like that. So technically 7, but Brisker's in place. Weirdly enough, I cannot believe it's Jaquan Brisker that I think guides the way the defense goes from the back end, but he's sort of such a weird piece because Jalen Johnson can play both zone and man from the outside. Kyler Gordon has played enough slot to where he'll live regardless of what you throw at him. Tyreek Stevenson, same thing. Kevin Byard, very flexible. It's Brisker that you can play him out of position or you can play him right. And when you play him right, he actually gives you things from the defensive end that I think a lot of people don't pay attention to. I also love the fact that since Brisker has like no regard for his own health and well-being, that it is great that instead of going from Brisker down to remind me the kid's name. I can't remember because I've blocked it out. Who was the third safety, former 7th rounder for a while?
Elijah Hicks.
Yeah, when Elijah Hicks would come onto the field, it was like the Bears went from a fine safety to one of the worst safeties in football. So now
Hicks was getting beat by 10 yards on some plays, man.
Everybody. So now Jonathan Owens comes in and you didn't really take a huge step back. And I'm stoked about that because it really feels like this Bears secondary has epitomized what Matt Eberflus keeps saying of you can't have too many good DBs. And he's right. And so you add a little defensive line juice to this defense and they kind of feel like they're brimming with talent, which is fun. It's really fun.
Yeah, no, it's really fun. And the good thing about this defense, if you want to just look at big picture and not just the secondary, but right now, nobody other than maybe Jack Sanborn, they are not going to lose anybody off this defense next year. Everyone's under contract for next year. Byard is a 2-year deal. Brisker's got 2 years left. Gordon's got 2 years left. Jalen's nailed down. Tyreek's got 3 years left. Edmonds has 3 years left. Edwards has 2 years left. Walker's got 2 years left. Sweat's got 4 years left, whatever it is. Like Billings has 2 years. Everybody on this defense is back in 2025 plus whatever they're going to add at edge or, maybe at defensive tackle. Like this unit has a chance to build to be, if they can get enough pass rush, to build to be a top 10, maybe push a top 5 unit. But I think what's more exciting about this unit, Robert, is the cohesiveness that in 2025, when everything should really be coming into place for the offense and Caleb's second year and everything, they may have the best defense in football.
I agree.
An argument for it if they add the right pieces.
Now, the part that nobody's going to like to hear, if you've already talked about 2025, is that as weird as it sounds, the Bears will need another corner, like another mainline outside corner by 2026. In all likelihood, Jalen Johnson is not going to last forever. I understand he's young. Most corners don't play longer than about 6, maybe 7 years. And Bears fans that are young, or that are old enough to remember back to when the Bears got Tracy Porter's twilight years will remember that the corner fall off is brutal in the NFL. And so that's probably coming eventually. But eventually does not mean now. Now we get what should be Jalen Johnson's second best season of his career, you would hope. And then you get holding on to the embers of 2023, 24 in 2025. And
you're also looking at a situation where, and it'd be bold to say this, but Tyreek Stevenson really improved throughout the season. He could be CB1 in 2026, and Jalen's a phenomenal CB2.
Yep. That's if Jalen can hang in there. I mean, you're as good as you're good against man coverage in this league, unfortunately, especially with, I mean, think about it, Bill. In that 2026 game, let's say that the Bears have a huge game against the Giants, and the Giants, like a normal team, are just going to put Malik Neighbors on the side of the ball that Jalen Johnson is on. If Jalen's lost a step and a half, are you excited about that stellar matchup with Jalen at CB2, or are you still worried?
Jalen's going to need a little help. Yeah.
And at that point, you just have to look at your options, especially when the guy's making $20 million a year. But I'm stoked that Jalen got his money. I really think it's a story that the entire locker room is probably wrapping its arms around, that Jalen worked his butt off. He got his payday. And Ryan Poles has shown that if you work hard, the Bears will reward you. And especially with the young quarterback coming in, galvanizing things, only positive things. I mean, it's really the biggest reason. I'm going to say it one more time at the risk of being obnoxious, Bill. This whole team feels like it is one pass rusher or defensive tackle away from being set and ready to tell the story it intends to tell. And maybe they think that that's going to be Yannick Ngakoue. But part of me thinks that so last year, and this is really tinfoil, just strap in. Last year, Yannick Ngakoue tweeted out, "ready to rush" in all caps. And days later, he had been signed by the Chicago Bears. He tweeted out the same thing about a month ago now, and he did not yet get signed by the Bears. And it makes me wonder if the Bears recognize the same thing, Bill, you and I do, that this roster doesn't have room for you to sign Yannick for $5 million a year and then also make a move after the fact. You get one more of these. And I wonder if they're already exploring their options on what a bigger fish could look like and how you would how you'd have to mold the salary to make it all work. I don't know, but it really looks to me like you're saying, if you added a little more defensive line juice to this team, this linebacker in front or back seven is ready to just pop for you. And why don't you want that in a season with a rookie quarterback? You want it to all come together at the same time. And a really sick defense would be a great way to steal 7 wins out of the first 10 relatively easy games on the schedule. And then what? You win 3 more in the back half and you're well in the playoff race.
Yeah.
Who's to say?
Absolutely. And that it's going to make for a fascinating season. But before we wrap up, let's do a little special teams. I don't want to spend more than a few minutes on it, but I do think it's interesting because there are enough questions here. Obviously, Cairo Santos doesn't really need any discussion points, solid kicker, but they spent a 4th round pick on Torrey Taylor. I think most Bears fans are okay with the fact that they did that because of what he can potentially bring to the table. And I've brought this up, and Patrick Manley was on the podcast last year talking about the struggles that Trenton Gill had getting teams inside the 10 or inside the 5. And I've talked about this multiple times on my podcast. For anyone, when I'm talking to the audience, anyone who's played football at any level, I don't care if you were 14 or D1, doesn't matter. You're in your own end zone on 1st and 10 because the ball is sitting at the 4-yard line. It is a lot different of a mentality than if the ball is sitting at the 14 and you're out of the end zone and sitting on your own 5 in the huddle. There is just a mental block of, oh my God, I'm standing in my own end zone. We have so far to go. Like I even brought up on a previous podcast, I've talked to Pittsburgh Steelers that were in that Steelers-Cardinals Super Bowl in the famous Roethlisberger drive where he found Santonio Holmes for the win. All the Steelers wanted to do was get 1 first down and punt so that they wouldn't give the Cardinals the ball back with an immediate chance to kick a field goal and win the game. That's all they wanted to do. Then a couple things go their way and they get a huge drive. They get the momentum. The mental hurdle of getting over being pinned deep is huge. And the difference between the 5 and the 15 is massive. So I think Torrey Taylor is going to make a big impact there that we haven't seen previously, probably since Brad Maynard. And I think he'll probably be better than Maynard at that. But I do think, Robert, the kick return and punt return situation is still a big question mark. We didn't talk about Velus Jones with the wide receivers or Dante Pettis or DeAndre Carter because they all fit in this conversation more. I don't know, as much as I am excited about Taylor and what he could bring to the punt game, I still think the return game in both the punt and kick is a giant question mark.
I think you nailed Torrey Taylor, by the way. I want to say that because I'm really excited about Torrey. I mean, I think you get 53 rosterable players. Why would you not aim to have the best at every position possible? Which I understand it's tough to scout punters, but when Ryan Poles says that other GMs called him and said they were mad that the Bears took him, that took Torrey in the 4th round, I'm inclined to believe him because he was really good. I mean, for crying out loud, even Dane Brugler, who's I think we can all agree is a very grounded individual, had a 4th round grade on Torrey Taylor. There are reasons why. As far as the kick punt return goes, I have no idea what the Bears are going to do at punt return because God knows Velus cannot track that ball in the air. But if he can track it on kick returns, I think it's his job to lose. He is probably, what do you think, Bill, the 2nd most electric runner with the football in his hands on the roster, which is a very weird thing to say about a guy who catastrophe has followed him like a dog nipping at his heels. But when Velus doesn't fumble and doesn't drop balls in the end zone, he picks up first downs really cleanly, breaks tackles, sees lanes. I mean, there is talent there. You just feel like you're working so hard to squeeze any of it out that it isn't worth it. But the new kick return rules fit him so well. I mean, Bill, that feels to me like one broken tackle and a touchdown when it comes to Velus Jones. Just not if he drops the ball. I mean,
and as he did track kicks pretty well. Now, again, most of the time they were just boomed in the end zone. It was a little easier. I think this time we're going to see kickers trying to move the ball around. Obviously, you're supposed to target it between the 0 and the 20. Are they going to try and kick left, kick right, or to fit coverage? I think there's going to be a lot more strategy here that none of us really have any idea. We're going to have to start reacting to this as we see it, even in preseason. It's going to be interesting, but there's going to be 2 kick returners back. Like I said, I thought Velus and Khalil Herbert make a lot of sense for the way I see kick returns working out. But I think this kick return rule is saving potentially Velus Jones's job. I think last year he proved to be a viable kick returner and not much else. And if kick returns were still basically a non-factor because kickers were just booming the ball into the end zone, I didn't see much of a reason to have him back there. But at the same time, I look at punt returns and go, it appears to be Dante Pettis or DeAndre Carter's position, and may the best man win kind of a thing. But I will also throw this in the mix. If Dante Pettis outperforms DeAndre Carter, fine. Okay. But if DeAndre Carter is clearly the best punt returner on the team, he also can return kicks. So while it would be very odd to only keep 5 wide receivers, when you have questions, potentially 5 running backs you may want to keep if you want to keep Travis Homer on this roster, between the offensive line, if you want to keep 3 quarterbacks, cutting down to 5 wide receivers on your final 53 opens up the door where maybe the Bears want to keep another position player at another position group on the offense, because you can have DeAndre Carter return punts and kicks, and you'll still have whatever Webster, Colin Johnson, whatever sitting on the practice squad if you have an injury to call someone up. So I do think the punt return aspect and kick return aspect, there's a lot could change potentially on how things work in training camp and in preseason.
It's a really interesting thought. I hadn't put 2 and 2 together on just how thin, you could say, the Bears are at receiver, that
after Tyler Scott, it's all interchangeable.
It drops off really hard and becomes almost immediately replaceable. I guess replaceable is not a bad thing. Again, Geronimo Allison. What? I forgot his name already. The one that you mentioned earlier. Jeff Janis. So, like, we've seen it before, but it's an interesting thought that they might infuse both roles together and potentially keep like an extra lineman or something like that if they're concerned about Nate Davis. But that's all a conversation that I bet you will unveil itself a little more as we get deeper and deeper into the preseason.
Agreed.
I bet you Velus has a pretty quick hook on this stuff. If I had to guess, it's Velus's job to lose, but he will lose it quickly, right? Whereas,
and I think if he loses it mid-season, like this isn't your back on the bench, you're gone.
You're cut. Exactly. Especially because it wouldn't surprise me if Velus is their wide receiver 5, But the question is whether he's going to have too many issues getting lined up and stuff like that. I could see him being the gadget guy that he was always supposed to be. If finally in this offense where you can line him up feasibly as a RB3 and actually give him the ball sometimes, but we'll see. I mean, as far as the special teams things goes, Bills, I keep finding myself just very interested to see how this kickoff thing works. Like, I
Oh
know
yeah.
we had some examples of it in the XFL, but the XFL just didn't have the juice that some of these NFL guys are going to have. So, how many more wild plays does this create a game? I mean, the ceremonial kickoff was nice for a time, but it did sort of feel like, okay, we come back from commercial, we kick the ball off, we go back to commercial, we come back,
And
and
now
now
the
let's
game
play
is
some
starting.
football.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah, no, it's going to be fascinating, and and we're even hearing how they may change with the kicker, and maybe Tory Taylor plays into that because he is an Australian rules football player that can tackle. We saw the Chiefs come out and say, well, we might have Justin Reed kick off because he's a good enough kicker to get the ball between the goal line and the 20, and he can play safety, which is what the kicker needs to be. Those kickers are going to be they are really going to be relied on for tackles. It's really interesting because you're going to have a lot of guys at, in essence, a fake line of scrimmage, wherever that is, at the 15-20 yard line. Again, I will see how this plays out. And if you get past that, if you have a guy like Valus or Herbert that has some juice, and you get past that quote unquote line of scrimmage, and you literally just have a kicker standing in your way, are we going to see a lot of kick return touchdowns this year? We might not see any. We might see teams getting pinned at the 5-yard line constantly. We have no idea how this is going to work out with NFL special teams. So I'm with you. I think the new kick return rule is a fascinating aspect. And I also will say this, whether it works or it doesn't, it's a great idea to try and return an exciting play back to the NFL, because the kick return, Devin Hester, perfect example. And even the guys that came before him, the kick return, when you're down because you just gave up points or you're whatever it might be, and you come back and you just come right back down, score a touchdown. It's a momentum shifter. It's a huge play, and it was dead. It was blast the ball into the end zone. We don't need kick returns anymore. I thought kick returns were going to disappear completely. So the fact that they have something like this available is exciting for me.
I appreciate it a lot. I mean, I'm right there with you. I think football, the whole draw is that it is the ultimate team game as opposed to being rugby, but different, right? A whole bunch of people that I knew wanted to start the ball at the 25. I think that that's just so boring. I think punts and kicks are what make football different in their way. And the only reason that I would hate this new rule is if somehow the Bears end up giving up 17 kick return touchdowns over the next 18, 20 games, and they only score 6 themselves. And I go, this new rule sucks. I hate this. And it undoes what otherwise looked like a super promising season. But I mean, it should be so interesting, Bill, because you have to imagine that there will be teams that if they give up too many explosives early, like super explosives, because like you're talking about, you commit all 10 of your tacklers to the ball and that guy squeezes through them all, is he just automatically gone the moment he beats the kicker in the open field? Does that become acceptable? Or do teams start allowing their opponents to basically get the ball for free at the 30, where it's like, no, go for it, but we're setting up shop around the 30 to tackle you. And at that point, you just won't have enough bodies. We'll see, but
Yeah.
it should be really interesting.
No, it should be. So, all right, let's wrap up this podcast, Robert. I'm going to give you one more question. Forget anything moving forward, just the 2024 Chicago Bears.
Yes.
In terms of the trying to reach the goal of making the playoffs, which should be their goal this year. What is the thing you are most excited about, offense or defense? And what is the thing you are most concerned about, offense or defense?
I'm most excited about the secondary. I could name a bunch of things. Obviously, everybody's going to talk about the receivers. Everybody's going to talk about Caleb Williams. But the Chiefs gave so many offenses fits because they had the DBs to really create problems that a lot of these receivers just haven't dealt with before, Bill. Like you saw this where Baltimore melted down. You will not convince me that Lamar Jackson, Todd Monken, and that Baltimore offense were operating with a cool head when the Chiefs hung 14 on them quickly and were in the early throws of the game stopping Baltimore's offense left and right. The effect that a good secondary can have on a death spiral is it exacerbates the problem a lot for a lot of these offenses. And if the Bears can create a rhythm where they score a little early, like they did with Justin Fields, they may be able to take a lot of these teams that they have, especially early in their schedule, that are not that strong, and wipe away what makes, say, the Washington Commanders any good at all. Where with Josh Dotson and Terry McLaurin, they're fairly dangerous in their receiving core. What if those guys aren't open? What's the offense then? And that question, I think, sets them up really well. And then did you want the thing I was most worried about too?
Yes.
It's going to be the defensive line's run game. I mean, how much do you have to, what kind of resources are you having to put in to get to 3rd and 8? How are you doing it? Are you able to do it consistently? Because I think this defense will figure it out, Bill, if they have to blitz on 3rd and 9, but they can get there consistently. I think that it's harder to figure it out if you're at 2nd and 1, 2nd and 3, 2nd and 2, 1st and 10, 1st and 10 again, 1st and 10 again, and you're just giving up gashes in the run game. People just start to feel like they're ground down at a pace. So, I mean, even if they signed a Mike Pennell type, which I think he's already on a roster, but some big ol' one tech that's going to come in and going to play behind Andrew Billings, and then you kick Zach Pickens over to 3 tech, and at least now you have a full core of defensive tackles. Like, I'm fine with that. If that's the direction they want to go, I can get with it. But until they stop the run, I'm really worried about the defensive chemistry.
Yeah, that's fair. And that's what makes this a compelling roster and a compelling team is
Truly.
you bring up those two things. Thing I'm most concerned about is the defensive pass rush. The defense, so we're both worried about the defensive line. You're worried about stopping the run, and I'm worried about getting the pressure. And while when I say most excited, it's not the thing I have the most confidence in, but the thing I'm most excited about is to see what this offense looks like with a new quarterback.
Amen.
So Caleb Williams is exciting. I have a lot of confidence in him. I know Robert has a lot of confidence in him. Now we're going to see if the Bears can put it all together. So if you missed the first episode, make sure you go back on the feed and check out the first episode. Of course, Second City Gridiron, the YouTube page. You can watch the videos there as well. But Robert, thank you for so much time. That was quite the marathon. I was expecting it to be. I think we did about an hour and a half and an hour and 40 minutes, an hour and a half on each one. So a little lengthy, but that's all right. I appreciate it. It's fun to talk Bears with you. And, training camp is right around the corner. It's finally here. The season is finally here. The season we've basically been waiting for since November. It's finally
waiting for all my life. Like, I mean, it really feels to some extent like 2 years ago, somebody picked up the Madden controller and said, "Nah, I'm going to make the Bears good." And they tanked on purpose, and they set Carolina's stats to really bad so that everything went wrong for them, and stacked up receiver talent. Don't you forget that it would be the Madden guy that would trade for Keenan Allen, wouldn't it? And
right.
So what an exciting season. It's going to look, I hope it looks weird seeing this uniform do that, right? Because it is a very not Bears team, but I think that's the fun of it. It should be so great.
And hopefully this not being a Bears team is that, 5 years from now, this is a Bears team and it is what we expect. So
love that.
Well, let's see what happens. It's a fun time to be a Bears fan. Look, we talked for, 3.5 hours or whatever it is, and we didn't even talk about the stadium. That's how much is going on with this Bears team. Robert, thanks for so much time. Again, the Bears blog and at Robert K. Schmitz on Twitter. If you're not following him already, I'm sure you do. But bear down, Robert, and we'll talk to you soon.
Can't wait.
All right. Thanks, everybody. That's going to do it for Bears Banter. We'll get back to a more traditional format with monologues and mailbags next time, but we will talk to you then. Bear down. Adios.